They told him the landing would be smooth. It wasn't. The shuttle jerked and groaned like a dying refrigerator as it pierced the upper atmosphere of Zareth 5, rattling so hard Julian was convinced he'd emerge from the cockpit as a protein shake. He gritted his teeth, tried to ignore the metallic shriek of overstressed struts, and muttered to himself, "Peace, envoy," they said. "Historic mission," they said. No one mentioned the ship might scream louder than I do. His translator drone buzzed sympathetically, which wasn't comforting. He knew that was just its auto-calibration loop. Still, it was the closest thing to emotional support he had on this planet. Outside the cockpit window, the skies of Zareth 5 were the kind of gold-tinged violet you'd expect from a romantic hallucination. From orbit, the planet looked peaceful. From 100 meters up, not so much. Below stretched a cracked landscape of shattered towers and scorched forests, veins of glowing mineral cutting through the earth like the planet had tried to heal and given up halfway. Wreckage from centuries-old orbital bombardments still littered the edges of the landing zone, half buried in dust and flora with too many teeth. Peace mission or not, the place looked like a war memorial held together by sarcasm and stubborn moss. The shuttle touched down with a final huff, hydraulic legs sinking into the dirt like it, too, was exhausted from the trip. Julian unclipped himself from the seat and stood slowly, spine popping in protest. He rolled his shoulders, grabbed his gear, and stepped out into the air of a world no human had walked on in over 70 years. It smelled faintly of ozone and something sweet, like burning sugar and wet stone. A welcome committee was supposed to be here. Supposed to be. Instead, he was greeted by silence and an unsettling stillness that pressed against his ears. Even the wind sounded unsure of itself. The ruins of what had once been a grand city surrounded him, all carved arches and spiraling towers now worn down to jagged teeth. Ivy glowed softly along the edges of broken stone, bioluminescent in pale turquoise streaks, like the planet refused to fade quietly. "All right," Julian muttered. "No welcoming parade. No ceremonial spears. No angry mobs. That's either good news or the first step in a really elaborate kidnapping." His drone beeped and bobbed beside his shoulder, projecting a holographic map of the area. The meeting point was marked in green, 200 meters ahead, just inside a structure that resembled a collapsed cathedral crossed with a reactor core. He made his way forward cautiously, boots crunching over brittle ceramic shards, glancing around for signs of life. Movement flickered at the corner of his vision, shadows dancing among stone ribs. But every time he turned, there was nothing. It wasn't until he passed beneath an arch carved with spiraling glyphs that he felt it, the weight of eyes, watching. Then she stepped into view. It was like the air stilled around her. Julian froze mid-step, words dissolving in his throat. The woman standing at the center of the ruined hall had skin the color of deep ocean twilight, smooth and luminous. Her golden hair shimmered under the soft light, spilling over the armored plates of a suit that looked both ceremonial and ready to punch holes through steel. And her ears, long, curved slightly backward, with intricate silver cuffs, twitched at the sound of his footsteps. Their eyes met. Hers widened, and then she started crying. Not sobbing, not wailing, just tears. Silent, immediate, as if something inside her had snapped the moment she saw him. Julian blinked, taken aback. Hi?" he offered, because interstellar diplomacy had not prepared him for spontaneous alien weeping. "I'm Julian Ward, human, Earth, peace envoy, not currently carrying any diseases or explosives, I think." She stepped toward him slowly, eyes locked to his like she was trying to memorize his soul. A single word slipped from her lips. "Kyle." Julian frowned. "Kale? Like the leaf?" "No," came her soft reply, voice trembling with what could only be heartbreak. "Kyle." His translator whispered in his ear. Name. Proper noun. Emotionally charged. Undefined contextual significance. She reached out a gloved hand but stopped just short of touching him. Her fingers hovered near his cheek, as if afraid he might vanish. And then, before Julian could say another word, armed figures emerged from the shadows. A half-circle of Zarethi warriors stepped forward, plasma spears humming, eyes sharp beneath ornate helmets. Julian instinctively raised his hands. Okay, Let's not do the stabbing thing. I bruise easily and bleed colorfully. The woman turned sharply. He is under my protection. The guards hesitated, murmured among themselves. One stepped forward, lowering his weapon slightly. Virelia, he said carefully, you can't be sure. I am sure, she replied. Stand down. They obeyed, but uneasily. Julian exhaled and lowered his arms, relieved but very confused. Thank you, he said, though I'm still lost on the whole crying at first sight thing. Not that I'm judging. Happens to me in mirrors all the time. Virelia's expression twitched as though a smile tried to surface and lost the battle. You shouldn't be here, she said. Not again. Again? Julian raised an eyebrow. Pretty sure this is my first Zarethi vacation. Unless someone hacked my memories, in which case I want a refund. She turned, gesturing for him to follow. Come. There are things you must see. He hesitated a moment longer, then fell into step beside her, trying not to stare too long at the way her armor glinted in the dying sunlight, or how her presence made the silence feel oddly warmer. So, he said as they walked into the shadows of the ancient building, if I had a credit for every time a gorgeous alien woman cried when she saw me, I'd have 1 credit, but I'd invest it wisely. Virelia didn't laugh, but her lips curved slightly. Julian took it as a win. Behind them, the wind picked up again, and somewhere beneath the ruins, a hum stirred, deep, old, and waiting. The halls beneath the ruined Zarethi temple were far colder than Julian expected, sharp with old power, and the kind of stillness that suggested even echoes didn't dare linger. He followed Virelia through a maze of cracked corridors, stepping carefully over broken slabs engraved with symbols his translator couldn't quite decipher. The glyphs flickered when his eyes passed over them, not like lights, but like memories pretending to be stone. The deeper they went, the more impossible things became. Floating shards of obsidian hovered in doorways, spinning slowly. Walls breathed faint pulses of soft blue light. He half expected to see a sign that read, "Welcome to the Vault of Whirring Technology. No flash photography." I have to admit, Julian said, ducking beneath a low arch that sparked briefly when his head brushed it, this place has a real haunted library meets alien doom castle vibe. Very on brand. Virelia said nothing, though he noticed her ears twitch again at his voice. She walked ahead with precision, her fingers occasionally brushing walls as if feeling for something that wasn't quite there. Her movements were calm, but he sensed tension in them, controlled, simmering. All right, Julian continued, stepping gingerly over a glowing crack in the floor that hissed at him. So let's get the obvious question out of the way. You saw me. You cried. You called me Kale. I'm not Kale. I mean, unless Kale was also terrible at dancing and liked pineapple on pizza. She stopped walking. I still don't know what pizza is, she murmured, but you move like him. You look like him. Julian frowned. I get that a lot. I have one of those faces. You know, the generic kind that makes galactic security do double takes at customs. You're not a look-alike, Virelia said, turning to face him. You are him, or something close. He opened his mouth to argue, but her gaze was too heavy with memory, too brittle with something more than belief. And then she was walking again, leading him into a circular chamber where the floor had collapsed inward, to reveal a spiraling descent of metal stairs glowing with embedded runes. At the center, like the still eye of a storm, hung a cylindrical chamber suspended by gravitic coils. And inside it, wrapped in layers of crystal stasis, was a man. Julian took one look and forgot how to breathe. The man in the pod had his face. Not similar, identical. Well, Julian whispered, heart thudding unevenly, that's either my evil twin, a cloning experiment gone rogue, or a really aggressive deepfake. His name was Kale, a human envoy from a different time. He came here during the final days of the Accord Wars. She faltered, the first true crack in her voice. We fought together. We lost together. Julian stepped closer, staring at the stasis pod. There were slight differences. The other him had a scar along his temple. His jaw was harder, older. But the resemblance was uncanny. The pod's sensors lit up faintly as Julian neared, as if recognizing him. A soft chime echoed through the room. "I don't get it," he said. "Even if this guy was me, how? Different timelines? Reincarnation? Is this some cosmic recycling program where I got stuck with his face and your emotional baggage?" Virelia cracked a smile. "Barely. We believe the vault fractured more than just matter during the collapse. Time, memory, identity. Zarethi science pushed too far. We built machines that touched other branches of reality. Kyle was caught in one." Julian laughed, though it came out thin. "That explains why I've had dreams I didn't understand. Deja vu so strong it made me nauseous. I thought it was just a side effect of eating freeze-dried spaghetti." "Some of what Kyle saw may be leaking into your mind," Virelia said softly now. "You were drawn here for a reason. This vault responds only to specific echoes, bloodlines, choices." Julian stepped back, running a hand through his hair. "So let me get this straight. I might be a recycled version of your long-lost war hero boyfriend from another dimension, and I've somehow activated a 1,000-year-old alien vault that could potentially unravel causality itself." She tilted her head. "That's a dramatic way of saying it, but not inaccurate." "Right. Cool. Just checking." He looked back at the pod, heart twisting. There was something in that frozen face that tugged at him. Not familiarity, but emotion, like staring into a painting of someone you once knew, long ago. "I'm not him," Julian said quietly. "Not really." "No," Virelia agreed, "but part of him may still be in you, and the vault may not care about the difference." They were silent for a long moment, the chamber humming softly around them. Julian let it sink in. The possibility that some version of him had already lived and died here. That these ruins weren't just history, but echoes. He finally broke the quiet. "So what now? Do I get zapped by an identity scanner? Fused into a quantum smoothie? Because I'd really like to survive long enough to at least understand one of the glowing wall glyphs." Virelia turned, eyes distant. "There's a deeper level. It was sealed after the last cycle. Cal believed it held answers, but we couldn't access it. Until now." "Let me guess," Julian said, already stepping toward the nearest staircase. "It opens for me." "It did," she said, "when you arrived." He paused at the first step. "Is this the part where the brave hero descends into the belly of fate, while his emotionally complicated alien guide pretends not to care if he survives?" Virelia gave him a look. "You're more insufferable than I remember." "Good," Julian said, grinning. "Means I'm making an impression." And together they descended into the vault's next level, where forgotten machines waited, whispers flickered along the walls, and the past had teeth. The stairs curved deeper into the belly of the vault, spiraling into darkness that pulsed with silent electricity. Each step Julian took seemed to hum underfoot, like the structure itself recognized him, or worse, expected him. The air thickened the further they went, laced with the scent of ozone, dust, and something floral that didn't belong underground. "I swear," Julian muttered, adjusting the straps on his pack, "if this is all just some ancient Zarethi reality show, and I'm the season finale twist, I want royalties. Or snacks. Snacks would be acceptable." Virelia chuckled softly beside him, her voice almost lost to the sound of their footfalls. She was less tense now, less the armored sentinel and more the person behind it. He liked that. Liked seeing her lips twitch when he made dumb jokes. Liked that she no longer looked at him like he was a ghost. "You're not a show," she said, though Cal would have appreciated the sarcasm. "High praise," Julian grinned. "We dead clones love validation." At the base of the stairs, the corridor widened into a chamber that defied architecture. Walls folded into themselves, endless and finite all at once, like someone built a cathedral using fractals and stubborn ambition. Floating mechanisms orbited around a central dais, an altar of sorts, upon which sat a crystalline control core the size of a coffin. It was cracked. Thin lines spidered across its surface, leaking soft white-blue light that shimmered in the stale air. The mechanisms turned toward Julian as he approached, their smooth black surfaces blinking with scanning glyphs. One by one they powered on, filling the chamber with a sound like chimes underwater. "All right," Julian breathed. "Now this is more like it." "The core," Virelia said quietly. It was built to store echoes of possibility, decisions, identities, memory shadows from across timelines. Kyle tried to use it to undo the war's beginning, to rewrite what couldn't be rewritten. And instead, he disappeared, she said. We believed him dead, but the core didn't destroy him. It fractured him. Julian stared at the light leaking from the cracks, piecing it together. You mean it split him across timelines, rebooted his existence like a bad operating system? Which means, you are one of those echoes, she finished. The last, perhaps, but the one strong enough to return. For a moment, Julian didn't say anything. Then, so let me get this straight. I'm a sentient memory glitch who just walked into the heart of a galactic time scrambler. Anyone else feel like we should be wearing hazard suits? Or at least carrying a guidebook titled So You Accidentally Became a Multiversal Ghost? Virelia tilted her head. We didn't exactly plan for a user manual. Julian stepped up to the core. It pulsed under his hand, warm, vibrating with potential. He could feel it in his bones, like a heartbeat that wasn't his. Images burst into his mind, 1,000 flickering possibilities. Kyle standing in this chamber, screaming into the machine. Virelia at his side, crying. Wars erupting. Wars never fought. Children never born. Cities floating. Cities burning. One timeline where they kissed. One where she killed him. One where they were never more than strangers. And through it all, the core, cold and watchful. This thing, Julian whispered, could break everything if I push the wrong button. You don't have to push anything, Virelia said. You came back not to change the past, but to understand it. He turned, eyes meeting hers. Then what do I do? She stepped forward. Let go. The core pulsed. The fractured light brightened. Julian closed his eyes and reached inward, not into memory, but into instinct, into that aching hollow where Kale's name still echoed like a scar. And for the first time, he remembered. Not facts, not history, but emotion. The way it felt to die for a planet not his. The grief of seeing a future he couldn't fix. The desperate hope that someone, anyone, might finish what he started. And somewhere in that surge, Julian chose. He opened his eyes and stepped back. I'm not Kyle, he said, but I carry him, and I think that's enough. The core shuddered once, then slowly, quietly, powered down. Its light dimmed, its fractured shell healed, line by line, until it sat dormant, waiting no longer. The chamber quieted. No alarms. No end-of-the-world countdowns. Just stillness. It's over? Julian asked. Virelia nodded. The vault recognizes closure. It's what Kyle never had. Julian exhaled, slow and deep. A strange weight lifted from his chest, like he'd been holding his breath for someone else for a very long time. So, he said, stretching, now that I've heroically prevented a timeline apocalypse, does this mean I'm officially eligible for Zarethi citizenship? Do I get a sash? Virelia smiled, a real one this time. We have no sashes, but I know a place with excellent stew flakes in a view of the twin moons. Sold. They walked back the way they came, side by side. The vault closed silently behind them, its ancient secrets finally at rest. By the time they emerged onto the surface, the violet sky had shifted to a cooler blue, and the twin suns burned low on the horizon. The ruins looked less like ghosts and more like possibilities. So, Julian said, hands in his pockets, what happens now? Virelia glanced at him. Now? You live. You eat stew flakes. You learn to not insult ancient relics. Maybe, her voice softened, maybe we build something new. He looked at her for a long time and smiled. As long as it doesn't involve any more cryogenic doppelgangers, I'm in. And somewhere deep beneath the earth, far beneath the ruins of a war once fought over memory and fear, the core slept. And Kale, what remained of him, slept too. But Julian walked on, whole, changed, and no longer alone. Zira stood at the edge of the battlefield, the wind whipping against her dark, shimmering armor. The stars above twinkled coldly, a reminder of the vastness of the galaxy she had roamed for most of her life. Her keen eyes scanned the horizon, where the remnants of the last skirmish still smoldered. The smell of scorched metal and burnt flesh clung to the air, as familiar to her as the scent of her homeworld, Larnus. To Zira, this was nothing more than another day, another battle won. Yet even in victory, there was always that lingering feeling that something was missing. She had fought in countless wars, from planets with fiery skies to desolate moons. Her reputation as one of the finest warriors among the Ryans, her people, was unparalleled. A warrior who never faltered, a warrior who never feared. She was Zira, and fear wasn't in her vocabulary. But today, something felt different. Her long blue skin glimmered in the pale light of the twin moons that hung high in the sky. Her long ears, sharp and elegant, flicked as a gust of wind swept through them. The way her golden hair moved, almost as though it were alive, was a testament to her people's advanced genetic engineering. It wasn't just her physical appearance that made her unique. No, it was her mind. Zira had always been a master strategist. She didn't just win battles. She annihilated her enemies with precise, calculated moves, leaving them no room to retaliate. "Commander Zira!" A voice crackled over her communicator, snapping her out of her reverie. It was her lieutenant, a young Ryan soldier named Calic, eager and overly enthusiastic, as always. "Yes, Calic," Zira responded, her voice cool and measured. "There's word from command. The next assignment, it's Earth," Calic said. His voice carried a nervous edge, though he tried to hide it. Zira's sharp eyes narrowed, and she tilted her head slightly, a soft hum escaping her lips as she processed the information. "Earth?" Zira repeated, as though she hadn't heard him correctly. "The blue planet?" "Yes, Commander, the very same." There was a brief pause before Calic added, "I hear they're not very advanced. We should have no problem taking it over." Zira's lips curled into a faint, amused smile, though the expression never quite reached her eyes. She had heard of Earth, an insignificant speck in the galaxy, populated by a primitive species of humans who were no match for the Rayans. Yet for some reason, this assignment didn't sit right with her. She had never fought an enemy that she didn't respect, and the thought of invading a planet that seemed so human was strangely unsettling. "Very well," Zira said, her voice as indifferent as ever. "Prepare the troops. We leave at dawn." As the line went silent, Zira gazed down at her gloved hands, feeling the weight of her weapons, a pair of plasma blades that had tasted the blood of countless enemies. They had never failed her. The Rayans had engineered them to be the most lethal instruments of destruction in the universe. Yet there was a gnawing feeling at the back of her mind, like an itch she couldn't scratch. Earth? What did she know about Earth? About humans? Nothing. And that was perhaps the problem. The following morning, Zira stood at the front of her battalion, watching as the massive warships of the Ryans descended from the sky. They were sleek and menacing, each ship humming with the power of 1,000 engines, their surfaces gleaming with the reflective sheen of alien metals. Zira had fought in many wars, led many invasions, but this one felt strange. Earth wasn't like the other planets they had conquered. Zira could feel it in the air. This place was different. The landing was swift, and within minutes, Zira's forces had set foot on Earth's soil. The planet was a mixture of green landscapes and sprawling cities, its beauty almost overwhelming for a warrior who had spent her life in the harsh, battle-scarred environments of her own world. The humans were primitive, but they had built something with their hands that felt real. Zira wasn't sure if she respected them for that or if it simply made her uncomfortable. There was no fear in her, only curiosity. As the first human soldiers appeared to face her, Zira couldn't help but laugh softly to herself. They were clad in flimsy armor, holding outdated weapons. There was no chance they could withstand the might of the Rayans. This would be over in no time. She stepped forward, her towering form casting a shadow over the humans, who stared up at her in a mix of awe and terror. "You're brave," Zira said, her voice laced with amusement, "but bravery will not save you." One of the human soldiers, a lanky man with a rugged face, stepped forward. His uniform was clearly not designed for the kind of war Zira had fought in, but there was a strange defiance in his eyes. "We're not giving up without a fight," the man said, his voice steady despite the fear that no doubt lurked beneath the surface. Zira raised an eyebrow. You have no chance against us, but I admire your spirit. It will make this battle interesting." A few of her soldiers chuckled at the humans' defiance, but Zira remained focused. She knew that they could wipe out these humans with ease, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this invasion than she understood. As the battle commenced, Zira found herself thinking about the human soldiers' words. They weren't giving up. No, they were fighting back. And that, for some strange reason, intrigued her. The first few hours of the invasion were exactly as expected. The humans fought with desperation, their primitive weapons little more than annoyances to her forces. Zira moved through the chaos with precision, her blades slicing through enemies with lethal grace. Yet as the hours passed, something began to nag at her. These humans weren't like the others she had faced in battle. They weren't cowering. They weren't broken. They fought with a kind of unrelenting determination that was starting to get under her skin. "Commander," Calic's voice broke through her thoughts. "Should we proceed with the full assault?" Zira hesitated, her mind whirling with questions she hadn't anticipated. The humans weren't giving up. What did that mean? Was it a sign of their courage or their foolishness? She had always prided herself on knowing the tactics of every enemy, but these humans were unpredictable. "No," Zira said, her voice hard, yet somehow uncertain. "We hold off for now. I want to observe them." Calic looked at her, his confusion clear, but he nodded obediently, trusting in his commander's instincts. As Zira continued to watch the humans fight, a small, unexpected thought crept into her mind. Perhaps this war would be different after all. The dawn broke over Earth with a soft, golden hue, casting a surreal light across the landscape. Zira stood at the edge of the battlefield once again, her silhouette a stark contrast against the rising sun. It was quiet now, a strange stillness hanging in the air. The night had been long, the sounds of combat and cries of her enemies echoing across the valley. But now the smoke had settled, and all that remained was the quiet hum of her weapons and the distant sounds of retreating human forces. Zira adjusted the grip on her plasma blade, the familiar weight of the weapon reassuring, its smooth surface glinting in the early morning light. Her long blue ears flicked slightly, alert to every sound, every movement. She had fought on many worlds, faced countless enemies, but Earth, this strange blue planet, was beginning to feel different. There was something about these humans, something beyond their primitive weapons and clumsy tactics, that had her on edge. "Commander," came the voice of Calic over her communicator. The young lieutenant always sounded eager, his voice high-pitched and full of energy, even in the heat of battle. "Our scouts have reported that the humans are regrouping in the town just ahead. It's strange. They're not running. They're organizing. It's like they know we're coming." Zira narrowed her eyes, her mind processing the information. The humans had a way of defying expectations. They weren't like the other weak species the Rayans had encountered. They fought with a kind of persistence that had, against all odds, earned Zira's begrudging respect. "Very well," Zira replied, her voice calm and measured. "We'll advance, but keep your eyes open. They might surprise us again." The ground beneath her feet trembled slightly as the Rayans' massive war machines began to advance, their sleek metallic bodies cutting through the dirt with ease. Zira's battalion followed closely behind, their armor shining like a deadly beacon in the growing daylight. As they moved toward the town, Zira couldn't help but notice how the human forces seemed to be preparing for something. They were setting up barricades, reinforcing structures, even using scavenged equipment from their homes. The sight was oddly impressive. As they approached the outskirts of the town, Zira could see the humans positioning themselves, creating a defensive line. It was nothing compared to the sophisticated strategies of the Rayans, but it was effective in its own way. A small group of soldiers emerged from the buildings, armed with crude rifles and makeshift armor. They looked out of place, like children playing soldiers in a world they weren't prepared for. Yet their eyes, Zira could see it even from a distance, held a determination that no one, not even the most battle-hardened Ryans, could ignore. "They're not as foolish as they look," Zira muttered to herself, her voice tinged with reluctant admiration. "I wonder if they're all like this." Calic, ever the optimist, piped up again. "Commander, we should crush them now, It's obvious they're outmatched. Let's end this quickly. Zira shot him a quick, almost amused glance. Calic, my young and eager friend, if I've learned anything in my time, it's that you should never underestimate your enemy, even when they seem ridiculous. Her words hung in the air as she watched the humans prepare. A slight breeze tousled her golden hair, and for the first time in hours, Zira allowed herself a moment to breathe. She was a warrior, forged in the heat of battle, but even she had to admit that something about the situation made her uneasy. "Ready your weapons," she ordered, snapping back to the present. "We advance." The Rayans moved forward, their weapons raised and ready. The human forces, though small, did not waver. They stood their ground as Zira and her battalion approached. It was a brave, if futile, stance, but there was something in their eyes that made Zira hesitate for a split second. She had expected fear, raw, unfiltered terror, but there was none of that here. The humans were ready to die for their world, and somehow that thought stuck with her as they closed the gap between them. Zira signaled for her troops to halt, watching as the humans stepped forward, rifles shaking in their hands. They looked terrified, yes, but there was an undeniable fierceness in their stance. "I don't suppose you'd like to surrender?" Zira called out, her voice rich with sarcasm. The human who stepped forward was different from the others. He was taller, with rough brown hair and a face covered in stubble. His eyes were locked on her, filled with something beyond fear, defiance. There was something about him that made Zira pause, her instincts telling her he was not to be underestimated. "We don't give up," he said, his voice steady, though the tremor in his hand betrayed his fear. "Not to the likes of you." Zira's eyes narrowed and she felt a strange pull, a flicker of respect for this human soldier. She didn't know why, but something about him felt familiar in a way. She couldn't explain it, but it intrigued her. "Well," Zira said with a wry smile, "I suppose we'll find out how long that lasts, won't we?" With a swift motion, she gestured to her troops. "Let's see if these humans can actually fight." The battle began, but this time something was different. As Zira led her forces into the heart of the town, she watched, fascinated, as the humans fought with a determination that was almost impossible to ignore. Their tactics were primitive, but they were quick, scrappy, and resourceful. They used their environment, their knowledge of the land, and their sheer willpower to create obstacles for the Rayans. Zira found herself smiling, despite herself. It was almost comical. One human soldier tried to throw a grenade, but instead of tossing it like a professional soldier, he panicked and tossed it too short. It exploded harmlessly at his feet, and he fell flat on his back, eyes wide. "I don't think that's how it's supposed to work," Zira muttered under her breath, stifling a laugh. But that soldier didn't give up. He scrambled to his feet, dusted himself off, and grabbed another grenade, determined to make it work this time. Zira shook her head, amused despite herself. Impressive. They refuse to quit, even when they fail. The battle raged on, and Zira's forces began to overpower the humans. Yet as the dust settled, she found herself admiring the tenacity of the humans. They fought with everything they had, throwing themselves into the fray without hesitation. It wasn't just bravery, it was something deeper, something Zira couldn't quite understand. As the battle wound down, and the last of the human forces retreated, Zira stood in the center of the battlefield, her gaze fixed on the horizon. There was still so much she didn't know about Earth and its people, but something was changing within her. The war that had seemed so simple, so straightforward, was no longer just a matter of conquest, and Zira was beginning to wonder if she could ever see the humans the same way again. Zira's mind raced as she paced in the quiet confines of the Rayans' War Command Center, located deep inside one of their towering, sleek ships. The metallic walls hummed with the soft, mechanical pulse of the engine, but Zira couldn't seem to focus on the quiet buzz of her surroundings. Her thoughts were elsewhere, on the battlefield, on the humans, and most notably, on the human soldier who had crossed her path. The battle had ended hours ago, with the Rayans claiming victory, but Zira hadn't been able to shake the strange unease that had followed her into the command center. Everything she had believed about humans had been shattered. The war, which had once seemed so simple, an unyielding clash between the superior Rayans and these primitive creatures, had turned into something far more complicated. "I'm starting to sound like Calic," Zira muttered to herself. "Too much thinking, too little fighting." Her lieutenant's voice crackled through her communicator, snapping her out of her self-reflection. "Commander, you requested an update. The humans have fallen back into the remnants of their cities. We've destroyed their military outposts. It's over. Should we begin preparations for the final assault?" Zira hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing on her. Her initial reaction had been to wipe the humans off the face of the planet, to end this foolishness once and for all. But now every time she thought of the human soldier, the one with the defiant eyes, her heart beat just a little faster. He wasn't like the others. No, he was something different. "Commander," Calic's voice was full of expectation. Zira looked out the viewport of the ship, her eyes scanning the barren landscape of Earth below. The atmosphere was still, the air almost too quiet for a planet that had just witnessed the devastation of an invasion. "No," Zira said softly, her voice more certain than she had felt in days. "We hold off. For now." The silence on the other end of the line was palpable. Calic knew better than to argue with her once she had made up her mind. "Understood," he replied after a long pause. The decision was made, but Zira couldn't help but feel the growing tension between what she had been taught her entire life and the reality of what she was experiencing. For so long she had been a warrior, a tool of destruction, fighting for an empire that had always been certain of its superiority. Yet now, standing on the precipice of victory, she was beginning to question everything. "I should never have taken this assignment," Zira whispered to herself. But even as the words left her mouth, she realized they were hollow. The truth was, she hadn't wanted to come here, but she had to. The Rayans had their reasons for wanting to conquer Earth, and it was her duty to follow through. But there was something about the humans, something that made her rethink the whole premise of the war. The door to her quarters slid open, and Zira turned, her hand instinctively going to the hilt of her plasma blade. But it was only Calic, his eager face filled with concern. "Commander," he said, stepping inside without waiting for permission. I understand that this isn't easy, but you have to see reason. The humans are a threat to us. They'll rebuild. They'll come back. We can't leave them alive." Zira sighed, rubbing her temples. She had heard these arguments countless times from Calic and from the others. They didn't get it. They couldn't. She was the one who had stood on the battlefield, watched the humans fight, witnessed their stubborn refusal to bow to superior forces. What could they possibly understand? "I know," she said quietly, looking up at Calic, "but I don't think it's just about them being a threat anymore. I think it's about something else." Calic furrowed his brow. "What do you mean?" I think I've learned something from them." Zira shook her head, disbelieving even as she spoke the words. "Humans, they don't fight because they know they can win. They fight because they refuse to accept defeat. I've never met anything like it." Calic remained silent, unsure how to respond. He had grown up hearing tales of the greatness of the Rayans, stories of invincibility. What Zira was suggesting was madness. But then again, she had never been one to conform to the rules of her people. That was what made her such a great warrior. Before he could say anything else, a loud knock came at the door. Zira's ears flicked, and she stood up, her stance becoming more rigid. The door slid open to reveal a soldier, breathless and panting. "Commander," the soldier said, bowing slightly, "we've located the human soldier you encountered during the battle. He's alive." Zira felt a chill run down her spine. The human? The one who had looked at her like she was something more than an enemy? What was he doing here? And why did her heart lurch at the thought of seeing him again? She glanced at Calic, her mind already racing. "Bring him to me," she ordered. It wasn't long before the human soldier was brought before her. He was bruised, covered in dirt, but he was standing, and his eyes, those damn eyes, met hers with that same defiance she had seen on the battlefield. "So," Zira said, her voice carefully neutral, "you're the one who refuses to die." The human soldier straightened up, his voice surprisingly calm despite the dire situation. "Seems like it," he said with a wry grin, "though I suppose I could have died easier if I'd just let you kill me earlier." Zira's lips curled into a small smile, despite herself. You really don't know when to give up, do you? Giving up isn't an option for us, he replied, his eyes locking with hers. It's not just about survival, it's about fighting for something. For our homes, our families, for our future. For Earth, Zira stared at him, her mind racing. There was something in his words that resonated with her, something she hadn't considered before. What if the war wasn't about simply conquering a planet? What if it was about understanding what made the humans so resilient? You'll die for your home, won't you? Zira said quietly, more to herself than to him. The human soldier nodded. We will, and we'll make sure that whatever happens, we fight until the end. Zira took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision settle on her shoulders. The battle she had thought she was fighting was no longer clear-cut. She wasn't just fighting an enemy, she was fighting herself. We're stopping the assault, Zira said, her voice firm. We're pulling back. Calic blinked, his mouth opening in surprise. Commander, are you sure? The humans are a threat. If we don't finish this, they'll come back stronger. No, Zira said, her gaze never leaving the human soldier. They won't. I've seen enough. I've learned enough. This war, it's not worth fighting anymore. With that, Zira made the decision to halt the invasion. She didn't know what the future held for Earth, or for her. But one thing was certain. She had changed. And maybe, just maybe, the universe was a little less black and white than she had once believed. The first time Mason Reese saw her, she was upside down. Not metaphorically, literally. Floating upside down in the zero-G arena, arms folded, legs crossed, a ribbon of golden hair snaking lazily through the air. She wore a form-fitting black suit with metallic seams that shimmered with tiny, shifting symbols. Like her entire outfit was thinking. Her skin was a smooth, almost luminescent blue, the kind of color you'd expect from the inside of a nebula. Not someone currently judging you from 10 feet above, with the kind of unimpressed expression reserved for undercooked food in Terran diplomats. You are late, she said, voice cool and precise, as if every syllable had been ironed before use. Mason blinked. Well, in my defense, I got lost. This ship has more corridors than a bad relationship. She didn't smile, didn't even blink. Just pivoted slowly in the air like some spaceborne owl of doom, drifting downward until her feet touched the deck with a grace that made Mason feel like a sack of wet laundry in comparison. I am Commander Soraya Vel, she said. You are Lieutenant Reese. I am, he confirmed. At least that's what the ID chip says. Want to scan it? I promise it only screams half the time. Still no smile, not even a twitch. She stepped closer. Her eyes weren't just gold. They were impossibly deep, metallic, like staring into the core of a star that had opinions about your posture. Mason straightened unconsciously. Her ears were long and pointed, sweeping back with the same elegant defiance as the rest of her. There was a stillness to her that made noise feel like a mistake. You were assigned to me, she said. You will train under my command. You will follow my directives. You will obey. Mason opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Sorry, are you sure you're not a dominatrix? Her brow twitched, just barely. But Mason counted it as a victory. The training chamber was massive, full of modular platforms, floating drones and shifting gravity fields. The walls pulsed faintly with power conduits, and the air smelled faintly of ozone and machine oil. A floating sphere drifted between them, training drone probably, or an angry, overachieving basketball. Soraya flicked a hand, and the drone powered up with a whirring hum. We begin now! Mason didn't have time to protest. The drone shot toward him like a caffeinated hornet. He dodged on instinct, barely, and immediately crashed into a gravity shift zone, flipping sideways and tumbling into a wall padded with just enough cushioning to make the pain ironic. Okay, he grunted. So we're skipping introductions and going straight to near death. Bold move. Soraya didn't answer. She just adjusted her stance and sent another drone after him with a thought. Mason stumbled, twisted, and barely managed to redirect it into a bulkhead. He looked up, panting, hair stuck to his forehead. Just checking. Is this foreplay where you're from, or am I actually being punished? You are being evaluated. Right, same thing. The drone paused midair. So did she. Your mind, she said slowly, is loud. Yeah, I get that a lot. Undisciplined, chaotic, like a storm of disconnected inputs trying to disguise themselves as insight. Mason squinted. That was weirdly poetic. I'd argue, but you sound like my high school physics teacher. I hear every surface thought you allow, and many you do not. Okay, that's creepy. I didn't agree to a brain inspection. You agreed to interspecies training, she said coolly. Virulon methods include partial telepathic interfacing. Partial? What's full interfacing, marriage? She walked away without answering. Probably for the best. Over the next hour, she ran him through a gauntlet of drills that made boot camp feel like a spa weekend. Physical, mental, spatial orientation under variable gravity, even psychological stress tests involving holograms of his ex-girlfriend yelling at him about recycling habits. Mason endured all of it with the grim determination of a man who couldn't afford to be court-martialed again. Soraya remained an inscrutable presence through it all, gliding through drills, predicting his choices before he made them, correcting his form with sharp gestures and even sharper thoughts. When he caught his breath, she was already mid-lecture. You hesitate before action. You doubt. You mask uncertainty with humor. That's because humor is cheaper than therapy, Mason wheezed. You fear failure. I expect failure. I just try to look good doing it. For a moment, the edges of her lips twitched. Mason saw it. He was sure of it. A tiny, imperceptible hint of amusement, like a star flickering out of the corner of your eye. Progress. Later, as they cooled down, Mason collapsed on the floor, Soraya standing like she didn't understand the concept of fatigue. He decided to push his luck. So what's your deal? He asked. You always this intense, or do I just bring out the murder in you? I was born on VRL Prime, trained in the Mind Forge at age 6, joined the Dominion's elite Psychoblade cadre by 16, exiled at 24. Yikes, Mason said. Sounds like your resume should come with a warning label. I was exiled for objecting to the High Council's rejection of the Earth Alliance. They assigned me here as punishment, he whistled. And I thought my last transfer was bad. I just called a general's cat emotionally unavailable. Silence stretched between them, a faint hum from the walls. Somewhere a drone retracted into its charging port with a satisfied beep. Why did you accept this posting, Lieutenant? She asked at last. Mason turned his head to look at her. Because Earth needs allies. Because I'm tired of our species being the cosmic version of a confused puppy. And because somewhere between the bureaucratic nonsense and the alien mind reading, you're kind of interesting. She blinked. Interesting? Well, terrifying, obviously, but interesting, like a lava lamp filled with knives. And there it was, again, the smallest twitch of her mouth. Rest now, she said. Tomorrow we will attempt neural resonance mapping. Sounds painful. It is. Cool, I'll bring snacks. As she walked away, her voice floated back like a whisper of thought wrapped in steel. Obey me, Earthman, and perhaps you'll survive this. Mason lay back on the cold metal floor, staring at the ceiling, grinning like a fool. Oh, I'm so gonna die, he muttered, but at least it'll be interesting. The second day of training began the way all good days of torture did, with a sense of foreboding. Mason woke to a soft alarm, one that played something that resembled the sound of two metal forks scraping against a cosmic chalkboard. It was designed to wake up everyone, and yet only Mason seemed to have a problem with it. He groaned, shoving the blankets off and hopping out of bed, only to promptly crash into a dresser that he swore had been on the opposite side of the room the night before. A quick glance at his wristband showed the time. 6 a.m., exactly the time when Soraya would be expecting him, and if there was one thing Mason had learned, it was that punctuality was non-negotiable with her. As he shuffled to the training chamber, clutching his coffee, which was closer to brown water than anything drinkable, he tried to brace himself for whatever new horrors awaited him today. Zero-G sparring? Mind melds? A mental death trap involving sentient jellyfish? Honestly, he wouldn't put it past her. Soraya was waiting for him, of course. She always was. Floating in the center of the training hall like a predatory bird who had just spotted a tasty meal, or perhaps, in this case, a very slow-moving, caffeinated human. Her golden eyes were sharp, and her lips were pressed into that eternal, disapproving line. She looked, as always, perfectly in control of everything. "Late," she remarked, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "This will affect your performance." "I'm sorry," Mason said, with all the sincerity of someone who had absolutely no intention of being sorry. "I hit snooze on my alarm. It turns out intergalactic warfare is a lot more peaceful when you're unconscious." She didn't even blink. "Your body has no respect for its own limitations," she said, and gestured for him to step onto the center platform. "Let us begin." This time the room was different. The training hall had transformed from a sterile, functional space into a bizarre, ever-shifting environment. One moment the floor was solid, and the next it was a quicksand of liquid metal that threatened to swallow him whole. Floating platforms slid across the room like billiard balls in an arena-sized game of cosmic shuffleboard, while an odd screeching noise echoed from somewhere overhead. "Today," Soraya announced, her voice a mixture of command and calm, "we will work on your mental discipline. To succeed in the Virilan Dominion, you must learn control, not just of your body, but of your mind, and your thoughts. If you cannot focus, you will fail." Mason's eyebrow twitched. He didn't know if he was more terrified of the alien technology around him or the fact that he had been asked to control his mind. He had enough trouble controlling his coffee intake. He didn't even want to think about taming his mental landscape. "You're asking the wrong guy, Commander," he said with a nervous laugh. "I'm pretty sure the only thing I've ever successfully controlled is my ability to procrastinate." Her expression didn't change. It rarely did. "I am aware," she said dryly. "Now focus." Mason took a deep breath. Mental discipline. He had read about the concept once in a self-help book during his Find Yourself phase. That was before he learned the only way to really find yourself was to accidentally wander into an alien training facility and get your mind invaded by someone who could read your thoughts. "Okay, so," he said, squinting at a floating platform, "do I, focus on the platform? Or the space around it? Or the black hole in my head where all my useful thoughts live?" "Focus on the space between your thoughts," she instructed, her voice an eerie calm. "You are thinking too much. You need to quiet your mind." Mason opened his mouth to ask how he was supposed to do that when he could barely stop thinking about the sandwich he'd eaten 2 hours ago, which had far too many pickles in his opinion. But instead, his mind was suddenly blanketed in a strange calmness. The room seemed to fade away, and for a moment it was just him and the floating platforms, circling him like predators. And then, with the precision of a surgeon, Soraya's voice sliced through the quiet. "You are still too distracted. Clear your thoughts." Mason concentrated harder, fighting the wave of doubt that threatened to crash over him. Control, discipline, focus. He thought about nothing, tried to think about nothing, but that only made him think about everything. The sandwich, the mission, the fact that Soraya was now looking at him like she could read every thought he wasn't allowed to have. He swore he could hear her smirk in his mind, and that just made it worse. "Focus," she repeated, and suddenly everything clicked. The pressure he had felt receded. A calm flooded over him, his chaotic thoughts slowing to a trickle. It was as though Soraya had pulled the plug from a drain in his head, and all the noise and nonsense was swirling away. He opened his eyes slowly, surprised by the sudden clarity. "You are improving," she said, though it sounded more like a diagnosis than praise. "But now we will add an element of stress." A series of metallic whirs echoed through the room, and suddenly the floor buckled beneath him, sending Mason sliding backward. He barely caught himself before falling flat on his face. A series of floating drones, spherical and sleek, dropped into view, hovering menacingly. Mason swallowed. "Oh, I don't like where this is going." "These drones," Soraya continued, "are designed to disrupt your focus. They will bombard you with distractions, noises, flashes of light, emotional manipulation. Your goal is to stay calm. Focus. Emotional manipulation, Mason muttered under his breath. You mean, like, those moments when I remember I have to call my mom? More specific, she said as the drones whirred to life. Expect them to target your insecurities. At that, one of the drones emitted a sharp, ear-piercing noise, followed by a glowing image of Mason's most embarrassing moment, a family barbecue where he'd accidentally knocked over the punch bowl in front of his entire extended family. The image lingered, complete with his aunt's horrified face. Mason groaned and shook his head. Really? This is what we're doing today? I already live in a mental prison of my own making. Do I need you to remind me of my failures? Focus, Lieutenant. But Mason couldn't help it. He laughed. It was so absurd, so predictable in a way. Of course, Soraya would target his weakest points. Of course, his insecurities would manifest like a digital nightmare, toying with his sense of self-worth. But he had been raised by family, and if there was one thing they'd taught him, it was how to laugh at the chaos. Oh, come on, Aunt Betty, he muttered as the hologram of his mortified aunt looped again. I was 5. You can't expect me to keep it together when your vintage china is on the line. The sound of her laugh was the last thing he expected. Low and soft, like the hum of a quiet wind. Her voice was steady when it followed. Your mind is too fragmented, Earthman, Soraya said, but you can laugh at yourself. This may be the first thing you have ever done right. Mason smiled at the unexpected compliment. Well, I aim to please. In between breakdowns and awkward family gatherings, of course. She remained silent, but he could sense something shifting, something that wasn't quite judgment anymore. For the first time, maybe, she was seeing him. Not just the failure, not just the chaotic mind, but something else entirely. They continued the drill, but for the first time, Mason wasn't consumed with dread. Instead, he found a strange rhythm between the floating drones and the flashing memories. They would attack, and he would laugh. And somehow, it was enough. The third day of training arrived, and Mason was almost beginning to believe he had a fighting chance at surviving this intergalactic mind meld exercise with the indomitable Commander Soraya Vel. Almost. It wasn't that his confidence had skyrocketed. In fact, his doubts still hovered like a persistent cloud of space debris. But something had changed in the air, the usual tension between them, like two magnets straining to connect, but constantly repelling, had softened, just a fraction. Soraya's gaze still sliced through him like a sharpened blade, but now there was a sliver of something else. He couldn't quite put his finger on it. Maybe it was a sign that he hadn't completely failed, or maybe it was just that after 3 days of mental duels, physical exhaustion, and humiliating drone distractions, he was starting to adapt to her methods. That's what he told himself as he stumbled into the training chamber, nursing a cup of coffee that was technically more of a thermal beverage meant to keep his internal organs from freezing. The usual hum of the chamber greeted him, but today it had an unfamiliar undercurrent. Less cold, less sterile, almost warm. Could spaceships feel warm? Soraya was already there, of course, her commanding presence like a silent storm brewing in the corner of the room. The holographic displays around her pulsed with abstract data. She looked over at him, her golden eyes scrutinizing him like a hawk eyeing its prey. You're early, she said, her voice still razor-sharp but with a slight, almost unnoticeable change. A note of, what? Approval? Was that it? First time for everything, right? Mason grinned, though he was suddenly aware of the fact that his palms were a little sweaty. This was it, the final test. Whatever this was going to be, it would determine whether or not he could pull off this whole interspecies alliance thing, or more realistically, whether he would walk out of here with all his mental faculties intact. Soraya didn't respond. Instead, she flicked her wrist, and a hologram burst into existence before them, displaying complex geometric patterns, shifting and twisting. Lines formed and reformed. A maze of impossible shapes like the universe itself was playing a cosmic game of Tetris. Neural resonance, she announced. The final stage. I will probe your mind, Lieutenant. You must hold on to yourself. Hold on to myself? What, like a metaphorical seatbelt? Mason raised an eyebrow. She gave him that same unreadable expression. Your mind is a storm, Lieutenant. It will try to throw you into chaos. I will guide you through it, but you must remain grounded. Well, you had me at storm, Mason said, faking bravado. But, I guess chaos and I are old friends by now. The corners of her mouth twitched. Barely. Progress. Without warning, the room transformed. Gravity flickered and shifted like a malfunctioning dial, but the real change came in the form of the mental presence that surged around him. It was as if his thoughts were being pulled outward, stretching into infinity, and suddenly he wasn't just standing in a room with Soraya. He was everywhere. His mind seemed to touch the corners of the universe. He could feel every neuron, every flicker of memory, every fragment of fear and joy he had ever experienced. And there she was, within it all, Soraya. Her presence was powerful, like a deep, steadying current running through a turbulent ocean. But she wasn't alone. Other voices began to murmur, shadows of his own doubts and insecurities, his failures, his fears, all amplified in this alien mental space. Focus, her voice cut through the storm, a tether in the swirling abyss. Don't listen to them. How do I not listen to myself? Mason's voice sounded small in the vastness of his mind. Isn't this like a literal existential crisis? You're not here to hear yourself, Soraya said. You're here to understand. Mason felt a sudden sharp tug at the back of his mind. The storm surged, louder, more threatening, like 1,000 voices whispering doubt. His memories of failures from his past twisted into monstrous forms, towering over him. His first mission gone wrong, the botched communication with a Viralian ambassador, his childhood, everything distorted, dragging him down. For a moment, he almost succumbed, almost let himself be swallowed by the dark whirlpool of his insecurities. But then, through the noise, he heard something else. Soraya's voice calm and firm. I am not afraid of you, she said, her words reverberating through his mind. You are not your failures. Something clicked. Mason let go. Not of the storm, but of the need to control it. He stopped fighting the chaos, stopped pretending that he could will himself into perfection. Instead, he embraced the mess, the mistakes, the awkwardness, the humor, the endless questions. Guess you really do know what I'm thinking, huh? He muttered, smiling despite himself. I'm kind of a walking dumpster fire up here. He felt Soraya's presence near him, and this time, it wasn't just guiding, it was supporting. Her mental touch was steadying, firm but not overpowering. She wasn't controlling him, she was helping him control himself. You can be whole, she said, her voice no longer just a command but something else. Not perfect, but whole. Mason's mind snapped back, and the storm faded. The holographic images shifted away, the absurd geometries falling back into nothingness. He was back in the training room, breathing heavily, his heart pounding in his chest. Soraya stood in front of him, silent for a moment, and then, against all odds, she gave him the smallest of nods. You have passed, she said. Her voice was steady, no longer the dispassionate commander, but something more human, more understanding. Mason blinked, a little disoriented. Past? Like really? Yes. You have learned to control your thoughts, to accept your mind's chaos and find order within it. Mason exhaled in relief. Well, that's a lot less dramatic than I thought it would be. She tilted her head slightly, and for the first time, there was a flicker of genuine amusement in her eyes. You thought I would break your mind, she said. Instead, I helped you understand it. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, Mason replied, still catching his breath. It was touch and go for a second there. I'm pretty sure I almost had an emotional breakdown with a side of intergalactic panic. Soraya's lips twitched. A side of panic? How quaint. He laughed, a real, hearty laugh. Well, if it's any consolation, I'm officially a little bit less of a mess now. You, might have actually done something good here. For the first time, Soraya looked at him not with judgment, but with something more akin to respect. A quiet understanding passed between them, and Mason realized that, despite her intimidating exterior, despite her overwhelming power, she was just like him. Not perfect, Not unshakable, but strong in her own way, and maybe, just maybe, they were more alike than he had ever expected. "So," he said, "we're good, right?" "We are," she replied, her voice softening. "For now." Mason grinned, relieved. "For now," he echoed. And for once, he wasn't afraid of what would come next. The universe was still vast, still uncertain, but now it seemed just a little more navigable, and with Soraya by his side, he might just make it through the chaos. "Obey me, Earthman," she had said at the start, and somehow that didn't seem quite as terrifying anymore.